The rain-slicked streets of Seattle gleamed under the sodium glow of streetlights, reflecting the muted chaos of a city that never fully slept. In a modest Capitol Hill apartment, Sarah Harrington stood before a full-length mirror, smoothing the creases of a navy dress she hadn't worn in years. The fabric clung to her frame, unfamiliar, yet elegant, as if it belonged to someone else's life. Her hands trembled slightly, adjusting a silver pendant her mother had given her. A small, tarnished thing shaped like a sparrow, its edges worn from years of quiet worry. Tonight she was to play the perfect wife at a gala for Caldwell Tech, her husband James's empire, where billions hung on the impression of a stable traditional family. She barely recognized the woman staring back, her hazel eyes sharp but weary, her chestnut hair pinned tightly, hiding the strands she'd nervously twisted earlier. The apartment smelled of damp wool and instant coffee, the kind Sarah brewed to stay awake during late-night bookkeeping for a local non-profit. Her life with James, a tech mogul whose name adorned Seattle's skyline, was a study in contrasts. Their marriage, arranged to appease his family's old money values, had left her a shadow in his world. James Caldwell, 38, with his tailored suits and clipped voice, was a man who commanded boardrooms but rarely noticed her. Their interactions were polite transactional, like two strangers sharing a lease. Tonight's gala at the Four Seasons was different, though. James had been explicit. Her presence was non-negotiable. Investors from Tokyo and New York were watching, and they valued tradition. A happy marriage was as critical as a balance sheet. Sarah stepped into the hallway, her heels clicking on scuffed hardwood. The walls held no photos, only a faded outline where a painting once hung a gift from James's mother that he'd quietly removed after a tense Thanksgiving. She grabbed her coat, its lining frayed from years of use, and headed downstairs to the waiting car. The driver, an older man named Carl, nodded without speaking, his eyes kind but distant. As the sedan wound through the city, past neon-lit diners and shuttered bookstores, Sarah's phone buzzed. A text from James: "Be there at 7 sharp. Smile. It's a big night." The Four Seasons ballroom glittered with chandeliers, their light bouncing off crystal flutes and polished cufflinks. Sarah stood beside James, her arm looped through his, her smile practiced but hollow. The room hummed with wealth. Men in black tie, women in gowns that cost more than her annual salary. James leaned in his breath, warm with whiskey. "Stay close," he said. "These people need to see us together." Sarah nodded, her jaw tight. She scanned the crowd, noting the subtle power plays, a handshake, lingering too long, a laugh too loud. Then she saw him. Michael Langford, a tech entrepreneur, whose startup, Langford Dynamics, was the darling of venture capitalists. He was mid-40s with salt and pepper hair and a disarming smile, his navy suit just unconventional enough to stand out. He approached, glass in hand, his gaze locking onto Sarah's. "Mrs. Caldwell, I presume," he said, extending a hand. "Michael Langford. I've heard, well, not much, actually. James keeps you under wraps." Sarah laughed, a genuine sound that surprised her. His handshake was firm, his eyes searching as if he saw past the polished facade. They spoke briefly about Seattle's reign, her work at the non-profit, his love for jazz. James watched his posture stiffening. Michael's charm was effortless, but Sarah sensed something calculated beneath it, like a chess player sizing up the board. As the night wore on, Michael found her again, this time near the dessert table, where macarons sat untouched on silver trays. He leaned close, his voice low. "You're more than just arm candy, Sarah. I can tell. Ever thought about stepping into the game yourself?" Her pulse quickened. The question felt like a key turning in a long, locked door. She glanced at James, deep in conversation with investors, his back to her. The gala's noise faded, replaced by the faint hum of possibility. In that moment, Sarah felt the weight of an unsigned contract, not on paper but in the life she'd been living, one where her name was barely a footnote in James's story. The ballroom's air grew thicker, with the scent of lilies and cigar smoke, a heady mix that clung to Sarah's skin like an unwelcome embrace. She excused herself from Michael's side, weaving through clusters of guests whose laughter echoed off the high ceilings, their faces illuminated by the soft glow of pendant lights swaying gently overhead. Her dress whispered against her legs, a reminder of the role she played, but her mind raced with the spark Michael's words had ignited. What did he mean by stepping into the game? She paused near a tall window overlooking the Puget Sound, where ferries cut through the dark water like ghosts, their lights flickering in the distance. The glass was cool against her palm, grounding her amid the swirl of opulence. James found her there, his hand brushing her elbow, a touch more possessive than affectionate. His cologne sharp and citrusy, cut through the floral haze. He glanced around, ensuring no one was within earshot, before speaking in that measured tone she knew so well. Impressed by Langford, he asked, his eyes narrowing, "He's a shark, Sarah. Don't let the charm fool you." She turned to face him, her reflection faint in the window pane, overlaid with the city's skyline. James's jaw was set a vein pulsing faintly at his temple, betraying the control he prized above all. Sarah felt a flicker of defiance, the kind she'd suppressed for 3 years in this marriage of convenience, brokered by his family's board to project stability in a volatile tech market. But tonight, with Michael's gaze still lingering in her memory, she pushed back. "Maybe I could learn something from a shark," she replied softly. "Better than being bait." James's lips thinned, but before he could respond, a server approached with a tray of champagne, the bubbles catching the light like tiny stars. Sarah took a flute, the stem cold and slippery, and sipped slowly, the effervescence sharp on her tongue. The exchange hung between them, unspoken tension coiling like a spring. She wondered if this was how it always felt for him. Every conversation, a negotiation, every glance, a potential alliance or threat. As the evening progressed, the gala shifted into speeches, the stage bathed in a warm spotlight that cast long shadows across the patterned carpet. James was called up his stride, confident, as he ascended the steps, microphone in hand. He spoke of innovation, of Caldwell Tech's latest AI breakthroughs, his voice booming through the speakers. Sarah sat at their table, her napkin twisted in her lap, watching the crowd nod approvingly, but her eyes drifted to Michael, seated a few tables away. His expression, unreadable fingers drumming lightly on the tablecloth. When the applause died down, Michael rose and made his way toward her again, navigating the room with the ease of someone who belonged everywhere. He pulled out a chair beside her, uninvited, but welcome in the moment's quiet. The table was strewn with half-eaten plates, crumbs, dotting the white linen like forgotten confetti. "That was quite the pitch from your husband," he said, his tone casual. "But tell me, Sarah, what do you think of all this? The algorithms, the data empires." She hesitated, glancing at James, schmoozing with investors across the room. Her work at the non-profit had honed her skills in data analysis, spotting patterns in donor trends that no one else noticed. But in James's world, she was just the supportive spouse, her insights confined to dinner-table small talk. "It's impressive," she admitted. "But it's all about control, isn't it? Who holds the data, holds the power? I've seen it in smaller scales, how information can lift people up or bury them." Michael leaned in, his eyes lighting up the faint lines around them, crinkling with genuine interest. Or was it Sarah couldn't tell, but his attention felt like sunlight after years in the shade. They talked, then really talked, about ethical AI, the biases baked into code, her ideas for inclusive algorithms that could democratize tech. He listened, nodding his hand occasionally, gesturing as if sketching ideas in the air. "You've got a mind for this," he said finally. "Ever consider consulting my firm's always looking for fresh perspectives?" The offer hung there, casual, yet loaded like an unmarked room in a familiar house door, ajar to unknown possibilities. Sarah's heart pounded the champagne flute, sweating in her grip. She thought of the non-profit's office, a cramped space in a Belltown building with peeling paint and flickering fluorescents, where her name had been struck from the volunteer roster last year after a funding cut. No fanfare, just a quiet erasure to make room for paid staff. James returned then, his shadow falling over them. He placed a hand on Sarah's shoulder, firm enough to signal possession. "Langford," he said coolly. "Enjoying the evening?" "Immensely," Michael replied, standing. "Especially the company." "Sarah, think about what I said." He slipped her a business card, the edges crisp embossed with Langford Dynamics logo, a stylized wave that evoked innovation's relentless flow. As he walked away, James's grip tightened briefly before releasing. "What was that about?" he demanded under his breath. "Nothing," she lied, pocketing the card. "Just networking." But it was everything. The conversation had unveiled a part of her she'd forgotten, a sharpness honed in college debates and late-night coding sessions before marriage dulled her edges. Back home, later in the dim light of their high-rise condo, overlooking Elliott Bay, Sarah sat on the edge of the bed, the card in hand. James was in the shower, steam billowing from the bathroom, the sound of water masking her thoughts. She traced the logo, feeling the raised ink, a trace of a once-celebrated achievement from her own past, a hackathon win in her early 20s, now unmentioned in her resume, buried under the label of Mrs. Caldwell. The next morning, over coffee in their sleek kitchen, granite counters spotless, the espresso machine humming, James was distant, scrolling through emails on his tablet. The city below buzzed with commuter traffic horns, faint through the double-paned windows. "Last night went well," he said, without looking up. "Investors are biting." "Good," she murmured, stirring her mug, the spoon clinking softly. But her mind was elsewhere, replaying Michael's words. By afternoon, alone in the apartment, she dialed the number on the card. Michael's voice answered on the second ring, warm and expectant. "Sarah," he said, "I hoped you'd call. Let's talk about that job." She agreed to meet, her voice steady, despite the tremor in her chest. As she hung up, the weight of decision settled, a quiet rebellion brewing. James would see it as betrayal, but to her, it was survival. Stepping out of the shadow, claiming a space where her name might finally matter. The meeting was set for a coffee shop in Pioneer Square, its brick walls echoing with the grind of beans and murmured conversations. Sarah arrived early, choosing a corner table scarred with years of use, the wood warm under her fingers. Michael showed up, punctual, laptop in tow, his smile disarming as ever. "Here's the deal," he began, sliding over a folder. "Unsigned contract for now, just an outline. But I need someone like you to analyze our data streams, spot the vulnerabilities before they become exploits." She flipped through the pages, numbers and charts, blurring slightly in the cafe's soft light. It was challenging, meaningful work, the kind that could redefine her. "Why me?" she asked, meeting his gaze. "Because you're underestimated," he replied. "And that's the best kind of advantage." Their talk stretched into the hour, ideas flowing like the steam from their cups. By the end, Sarah felt alive, the allure of independence pulling her forward, even as guilt nipped at her heels. The aroma of fresh ground coffee lingered in Sarah's nostrils as she left the Pioneer Square Cafe, the folder from Michael tucked under her arm like a secret weapon. Outside, the afternoon sun filtered through overcast skies, casting a diffused light on the red brick facades and the uneven cobblestones underfoot. Tourists milled about, snapping photos of the historic totem poles, their voices a distant murmur against the rumble of a passing streetcar. Sarah's steps were deliberate, her low heels clicking rhythmically, but inside a storm brewed, excitement laced with trepidation, the kind that made her stomach twist like a damp rag. She had nodded at Michael's proposal, her voice barely above a whisper, committing to a trial period at Langford Dynamics. It wasn't betrayal, she told herself. It was necessity, a way to escape the invisible chains of her marriage. Back at the condo, the elevator hummed upward, its mirrored walls reflecting her flushed cheeks and the faint smudge of lipstick she'd reapplied in the cafe's bathroom. The doors opened to their floor, the hallway carpet muffling her approach. James wasn't home yet. His schedule was a fortress of meetings, but the space felt charged, as if the walls absorbed her every secret. She set the folder on the kitchen island, its manila surface stark against the polished quartz, and poured a glass of water from the filtered tap, the liquid cool and metallic on her tongue. Flipping through the pages again, she traced the bullet points: data analysis, competitive intelligence, flexible hours. Unsigned contract. It read at the top, a provisional agreement that could be inked or discarded. But to Sarah, it was a lifeline, a chance to wield her intellect in the cutthroat arena of Seattle's tech startups, where ideas clashed like waves against the shore. That evening, as rain pattered against the floor-to-ceiling windows, blurring the view of the Space Needle's distant silhouette, Sarah cooked dinner. A simple stir-fry, the sizzle of vegetables in the wok, filling the air with garlic and soy. James arrived late, his briefcase thumping onto the entry table, his tie loosened like a noose, half removed. He kissed her cheek absently, the gesture mechanical, and sat at the counter, scrolling his phone. Long day, she asked, plating the food steam rising in lazy curls. Always, he replied, not looking up. Board wants updates on the AI pivot. Langford's breathing down our necks with their new funding round. Sarah's fork paused mid-air, the mention of Michael sending a jolt through her. She set it down, the clink, echoing softly. About that? I met with him today. He's offered me a consulting gig. James's head snapped up, his eyes, sharpening like a lens focusing. The room seemed to shrink, the pendant lights overhead, casting harsh shadows on his face, highlighting the furrow between his brows. You what? He said, voice low but edged. Sarah, he's my direct competitor. This isn't some hobby, it's sabotage. She met his gaze, her hands steady, despite the pulse hammering in her throat. Feeling like a pawn in their corporate chess game, maneuvered between two kings, ignited a fire she'd long banked. It's not about you, James, or him. It's about me. I've been invisible for 3 years, your wife on paper, nothing more. This is my move. He stood pacing to the window, his reflection ghostly against the rain-streaked glass. The city lights twinkled below a mosaic of ambition and anonymity. You think this makes you independent, working for the enemy. He'll use you, discard you. Maybe she countered, rising to face him. But at least I'll be playing the game, not watching from the sidelines. The argument simmered into silence, broken only by the dishwasher's hum in the background. James retreated to his study, the door clicking shut like a final word. Sarah cleared the plates, the porcelain cool and slick under her fingers, her mind replaying the exchange. She felt the weight of her decision, a strategic gambit that could shatter their fragile union or forge her anew. The next day dawned grey, the kind of Seattle morning where fog clung to the sound like a reluctant lover. Sarah drove to Langford Dynamics' office in South Lake Union, a modern building of glass and steel, its facade reflecting the trolley tracks and joggers below. The lobby smelled of fresh paint and ambition, with a reception desk manned by a young woman whose name tag read Eleanor. Sarah signed in, her pen scratching across the digital pad, feeling the thrill of entry into this new world. Michael greeted her in a conference room on the 5th floor, the space unmarked on the directory. A neutral zone for sensitive projects, its walls bare, except for a whiteboard smeared with faded equations. He shook her hand, his grip warm, and gestured to a seat at the oval table scattered with laptops and notepads. "Glad you came," he said, sliding over a tablet. "Start with this data set. Spot the patterns, tell me what Caldwell's missing." She dove in the screen's glow, illuminating her face fingers flying across the keys. Hours blurred the room's air conditioner, whispering steadily as she uncovered inefficiencies in competitor algorithms, subtle biases that could erode market share. Michael watched, nodding approvingly, his coffee mug leaving rings on the wood like temporary tattoos. "Impressive," he murmured during a break, leaning back. "You see things others don't." Sarah smiled faintly, but doubt crept in. Was this genuine opportunity, or a ploy to glean intel on James? She pushed it aside, focusing on the work, the satisfaction of her mind, engaged after years of dormancy. By week's end, she'd drafted a report, her name typed boldly at the top, a trace of a once-celebrated achievement from her college days, a data modeling award, now unmentioned in professional circles, overshadowed by her marital status. Michael praised it in a team meeting the room filled with young engineers whose eyes widened at her insights. "This could shift the tide," he said to the group. "Sarah's our secret weapon." The words echoed, empowering yet eerie, as if she were a tool in his arsenal. Back home, James's silence grew colder, meals eaten in separate rooms, the condo's open layout feeling cavernous. One night, as she lay in bed, the sheets cool against her skin, he finally spoke from the doorway, his silhouette framed by hallway light. "How's the job?" he asked, tone laced with sarcasm. "Fulfilling," she replied honestly. "For once." He sighed, rubbing his temples, the gesture weary. The tension between them mounted a silent war, where every glance was a skirmish. Sarah knew she was walking a tightrope, but the independence tasted like freedom, bitter and sweet, pushing her toward a horizon she'd only dreamed of. At Langford, the projects intensified. Sarah analyzed market trends in an unmarked room down the hall, its door blending seamlessly with the wall, a holdover from the building's previous tenants, whose logos had been scraped off, leaving faint outlines like ghosts. She collaborated with a coder named Raj, his desk cluttered with energy drink cans, their conversations flowing over lines of code. "You're a natural," Raj said one afternoon, peering at her screen. "Where'd you learn this?" "Self-taught, mostly," she admitted, omitting the late nights in her old apartment, poring over online courses while James traveled. The work consumed her, but so did the guilt. Evenings brought terse exchanges with James, his pride-wounded jealousy simmering like a pot left on low heat. "You're choosing him over us," he accused one rainy night, the drops drumming against the balcony doors. "No," she shot back. "I'm choosing me." The gambit was set, independence her prize, but the cost loomed a shadow, lengthening with each passing day. The fluorescent hum of Langford Dynamics' open-plan office blended with the clack of keyboards and the occasional ping of incoming emails, creating a symphony of productivity that Sarah had come to crave. She sat at her desk in the corner cubicle, the partition walls covered in sticky notes, scrawled with algorithms and deadlines, their yellow edges curling like autumn leaves. The space smelled faintly of printer ink and microwave popcorn from the break room down the hall, where colleagues gathered for hurried lunches. Sarah's fingers danced over her laptop keys, analyzing a stream of user data from a beta app, her hazel eyes narrowing at the screen's blue glow. Patterns emerged like constellations in a night sky, inefficiencies in user retention that could be tweaked for exponential growth. It was work that made her feel potent, her mind a blade slicing through the digital fog far from the ornamental role she'd played in James's life. Weeks had turned into a rhythm, mornings in the condo, with terse goodbyes, James's coffee mug left half full on the counter, its ceramic surface cooling as he headed to Caldwell Tech's gleaming headquarters in Bellevue. Afternoons immersed in Michael's world, where her contributions were valued, not overlooked. Evenings brought the strain home, the air thick with unspoken accusations. Sarah would slip off her shoes in the entryway, the cool tile soothing her aching feet, and find James in the living room, his tablet casting shadows on the leather couch. The city lights outside twinkled mockingly, a reminder of the empire he built, while she faded into its backdrop. One such evening as fog rolled in from the sound, blanketing the streets in a hazy veil, Sarah arrived home to the scent of takeout Thai, Pad See Ew congealing in cardboard containers on the dining table. James sat there, fork in hand, his shirt sleeves rolled up, exposing the faint scar on his forearm from a childhood accident he'd never elaborated on. He looked up, his blue eyes, stormy, the lines around them deeper than she remembered. "You're late again," he said, pushing a container toward her. "Langford keeping you busy." She nodded, hanging her coat on the rack, its wool fibers damp from the mist. Sitting across from him, she picked at the noodles, the spicy aroma clashing with the tension. "We closed a deal today. My analysis helped seal it, projected millions in revenue." James's fork paused, hovering mid-air sauce, dripping slowly onto the tablecloth. Pride flickered in his expression, quick as a match strike, before jealousy smothered it. "Congratulations," he muttered. "Helping my rival bury me." Sarah set her fork down the metal, clinking sharply. She felt the push-pull inside him, the man who admired her intellect, yet resented its direction. It was a grapple she sensed in his every glance, his pride, a fortress cracking under the assault of her success. "It's not about burying you, James. It's about building something for myself. You have your empire. Why can't I have this?" He leaned back, rubbing his jaw, the stubble rasping under his fingers. The room's pendant light swayed faintly from a draft casting oscillating shadows that danced across his face. "Because it's him, Langford. He's using you to get at me. Can't you see that?" She could in fleeting moments, Michael's probing questions about industry trends that skirted too close to Caldwell's strategies. But the validation outweighed the suspicion her reports praised in team huddles, her name finally spoken with respect. At work, she'd been assigned a project, in an unmarked room on the 3rd floor, a converted storage space with no plaque on the door, its walls still bearing the faint outlines of removed shelves where previous occupants had stored forgotten prototypes. There, amid stacked boxes and the hum of a lone server rack, she dissected competitive intel, her insights fueling Langford's edge. The tensions rose subtly at first, like tide inching up the shore. James began working longer hours, his texts curt, "Home late. Don't wait up." Sarah noticed the changes in him, the way his shoulders hunched when he read business news on his phone articles, hinting at Langford's surging valuations. One weekend, they attended a charity event at the Seattle Art Museum, the galleries filled with abstract sculptures that twisted like their conversations. James gripped her hand too tightly amid the crowd, his palm sweaty as Michael approached, champagne flute in hand. Sarah Stella work on that app. "Pivot," Michael said, his voice smooth as polished stone. "James' old rival. How's the fort holding?" James's smile was a thin veneer, his free hand clenching at his side. "Solid as ever, though I hear you're poaching talent now." Michael chuckled, clinking glasses, the sound crystalline in the echoing space. Sarah stood between them, her black cocktail dress feeling like armor, the fabric's silk cool against her skin. She sensed the undercurrent the way both men eyed her. Not as a person, but a prize in their corporate duel. Back home, the argument erupted in the car rain, streaking the windshield like tears. James gripped the steering wheel knuckles white, the wipers thumping rhythmically. "He's flaunting you like a trophy," he growled. "And you're letting him—" "No," she shot back, her voice rising. "You're the one who treats me like property. At least there I'm valued for my brain." The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the engine's purr as they pulled into the garage, its fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. Upstairs, James retreated to the balcony, staring at the fog-shrouded bay, his breath visible in the chill air. Sarah watched from inside her reflection in the glass door superimposed over him, a ghost in their shared space. She thought of a trace of a once-celebrated achievement, her undergraduate thesis on data ethics, published in a journal, but now unmentioned, gathering digital dust since marriage relegated her to the background. As Sarah excelled, the jealousy festered. At Langford, she led a small team, her desk now adorned with a nameplate she'd ordered herself, the engraved letters gleaming under the office lights. Colleagues sought her advice, their voices eager in the break room, where vending machines hummed and dispensed candy bars with a mechanical thud. Raj the coder became a confidant, sharing lunches of bento boxes amid the clatter of trays. "You're killing it," he said one day, munching on sushi. "Boss can't stop singing your praises." But praise came with pressure. Michael called her into his office, a corner suite with views of Lake Union boats bobbing on the water like toys. He leaned on his desk papers, scattered an unsigned contract peeking from beneath a stack, the outline for her permanent role. "You're indispensable," he said. "But I need more on Caldwell's AI pipeline." Off the record, of course. Sarah hesitated, the leather chair creaking under her. The request hung like smoke, blurring lines she'd tried to keep sharp. She demurred, changing the subject, but the seed of doubt took root. Home life frayed further. James's pride manifested in small barbs, comments on her late nights, his eyes lingering on her work bag as if it were contraband. One night, over a dinner of grilled salmon, the flaky fish cooling on plates, he finally cracked. "I saw the press release. Langford's new feature. Sounds suspiciously like our prototype." "Coincidence," she replied, though uncertainty gnawed at her. He slammed his napkin down the fabric, whispering against the wood. The grapple intensified jealousy, a venom seeping into their every interaction, pushing them toward a precipice neither wanted to acknowledge. Yet in quiet moments, Sarah glimpsed his pain, the way he lingered in doorways, watching her with a mix of admiration and loss. The tensions rose a slow boil as her role at Langford deepened, aiding ventures that chipped at James's domain, forcing him to confront the woman he'd underestimated. The crisp autumn air carried the scent of fallen leaves and distant wood smoke as Sarah navigated the bustling streets of South Lake Union, her scarf wrapped tightly against the chill wind whipping off the lake. She clutched her laptop bag, its strap digging into her shoulder, heavy with the weight of confidential files she'd been poring over all morning. At Langford Dynamics, the office had taken on a frenetic energy, with developers huddled around monitors, their screens flickering with lines of code that danced like fireflies in the dim overhead lighting. Sarah's cubicle felt like a sanctuary amid the chaos, its walls pinned with printouts of data, visualizations, graphs curving elegantly to reveal market trends. But lately, an undercurrent of unease had seeped in like the faint drip of a leaky faucet in the break room where coffee stains dotted the countertops and empty mugs clustered like forgotten soldiers. Michael had been more insistent, his meetings laced with urgency. That morning in the unmarked room on the third floor, its door still blending into the hallway, paneling a remnant of the building's hasty renovation where old tenant logos had been hastily painted over. He'd handed her a thumb drive, its plastic casing cool and unassuming in her palm. "This is sensitive," he'd said, his voice a conspiratorial whisper. "Analyze the projections. See if we can undercut Caldwell's next launch." Sarah had nodded, slipping the drive into her bag, but as she worked through the data back at her desk patterns, emerged that twisted her gut. The files outlined a proposal to poach key talent from Caldwell Tech, coupled with a disinformation campaign via anonymous leaks to investors. It was ruthless, a digital ambush designed to erode James's market share overnight. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, the keys slightly sticky from her hurried lunch of a turkey sandwich, earlier crumbs still scattered on her mouse pad. The proposal was unsigned, a draft contract buried in the appendices, its terms vague but damning. Offers of stock options to defectors, timed to coincide with Caldwell's quarterly earnings report. As the day wore on, the office emptied gradually, colleagues bundling into coats and scarves, their footsteps echoing down the tiled corridors. Sarah stayed late, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, casting a sterile glow that made her skin look pallid in the reflection of her darkened screen. She cross-referenced the data with public filings, her mind racing through ethical minefields. This wasn't just competition, it was sabotage, a calculated strike that could crumble James's empire and, by extension, the fragile remnants of their life together. Guilt gnawed at her sharp as the cold draft sneaking under the door, reminding her of the non-profit days when she'd flagged funding discrepancies with integrity, not malice. Driving home through rush-hour traffic, the taillights ahead blurring in the light rain that speckled her windshield, Sarah's thoughts churned. The wipers swished rhythmically, a metronome to her dilemma. Should she warn James, confront Michael, or stay silent, preserving the independence she'd fought for? The condo loomed ahead, its windows glowing warmly against the darkening sky, but inside the atmosphere had grown as frosty as the season. James was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables with precise, forceful strokes, the knife thudding against the cutting board like accusations. "Rough day?" he asked, not turning around his back, rigid under the soft light of the range hood. Sarah set her bag down the thumb drive, burning a metaphorical hole in its pocket. She leaned against the counter, the granite cold through her sweater, and watched him work, the way his shoulders tensed, a telltale sign of the stress he'd been carrying since her job switch. "Same as always," she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "Yours?" He paused, setting the knife aside, and faced her, his eyes searching hers with an intensity that made her avert her gaze to the steam rising from the pot on the stove. Investors are jittery. Rumors of a leak. Someone feeding intel to competitors. Sound familiar? The words hung heavy, laced with suspicion. Sarah's heart pounded, the aroma of sautéing onions filling the air, cloying now rather than comforting. She thought of the proposal, its unsigned contract, a ghost in the machine, a plan that could erase James's legacy as swiftly as her own achievements had been sidelined in their marriage. "I wouldn't know," she said softly, the lie tasting bitter on her tongue. Dinner passed in strained silence, the clink of forks against plates the only conversation. Later in the living room, James scrolled through his tablet on the couch, the blue light etching shadows on his face, while Sarah pretended to read a book, its pages turning unread. The moral dilemma pressed on her, a weight that made her chest tight, as if the room's air had thinned. She excused herself to the bedroom, the carpet soft underfoot, and sat on the edge of the bed, pulling out her phone. An anonymous email tip had arrived that afternoon, perhaps from a whistleblower at Langford, linking to an encrypted file that mirrored the proposal she'd seen. Opening it, she scanned the details again, the screen's glow illuminating her furrowed brow. It confirmed Michael's hidden motives, not just rivalry, but a vendetta rooted in a past deal gone sour, where James had outbid him on a crucial patent. The revelation hit like a cold wave, chilling her to the core. Sarah paced the room, the floorboards creaking faintly, her mind a whirlwind of loyalties. James had been cold, yes, but this sabotage felt like overkill, a betrayal of the industry's unspoken codes, and she was complicit her work, the unwitting fuel. Slipping into bed later, the sheets crisp and unyielding, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling fan's slow rotation, its blades slicing the air with a soft whoosh. James joined her eventually, his side of the bed dipping, but he turned away, the space between them vast as an ocean. The next day at work, the dilemma shadowed her every step. In the break room, pouring coffee into a mug, chipped from overuse, she overheard whispers, colleagues discussing the proposal in hushed tones, their eyes darting. Raj approached, stirring his tea, the spoon tinkling against the ceramic. "Heard about the big play," he said, casually. "Michael's going all in against Caldwell." Sarah forced a smile, the hot liquid scalding her lip as she sipped. Yeah, exciting times. But inside, turmoil raged. During a team meeting in the conference room, its glass walls fogged from the heater's blast, Michael outlined the strategy, his marker squeaking on the whiteboard as he drew timelines. Sarah sat quietly, notebook in hand, doodling absent-mindedly, circles intersecting like her conflicting paths. The proposal's leak had spread online forums, buzzing with speculation, a trace of a once-celebrated achievement for Michael, now twisted into infamy, his early startup success, lauded in tech magazines, but unmentioned after a scandalous exit, fueling his grudge. By afternoon, alone in the unmarked room, surrounded by the faint scent of dust and old wiring, Sarah copied the files to her personal drive, a safeguard or a weapon. She wasn't sure. The moral crossroads loomed, forcing her to weigh independence against integrity, her role in the sabotage, a mirror to the erasures she'd endured. Confrontation brewed, but with whom? Michael for his deception, James for his blindness, or herself for walking this path. As evening fell, the office lights dimming one by one, Sarah left with resolve hardening like ice on the lake. Home awaited the dilemma, a silent companion pushing her toward a choice that could redefine everything. The winter chill had settled over Seattle, like a persistent fog frosting the windows of the condo, with intricate patterns that Sarah traced absent-mindedly with her fingertip, the glass icy against her skin. She stood there in the early morning light, a mug of tea steaming in her hands, its herbal scent mingling with the faint aroma of James's aftershave lingering in the air. The dilemma from the previous days weighed on her like a sodden coat, the thumb drive still hidden in her bag, its contents a ticking bomb she hadn't yet defused. Work at Langford had become a minefield, each meeting laced with the knowledge of Michael's scheme, her contributions now tainted by the potential fallout. She'd avoided direct involvement, rerouting her analyses to neutral projects, but the guilt eroded her focus, making her movements mechanical, her smiles forced amid the office's hum of keyboards and murmured collaborations. James had grown quieter, his presence in the home, a shadow of its former command. Mornings like this, he'd emerge from the bedroom, in his robe, hair tousled eyes, ringed with fatigue from sleepless nights spent reviewing reports in his study. The kitchen's under-cabinet lights cast a warm glow on the espresso machine as he brewed his coffee, the grinder's whir breaking the silence. Sarah watched him, noting the slump in his shoulders, the way he gripped the counter, as if steadying himself against an invisible tide. "We need to talk," she said finally, her voice cutting through the quiet like a knife through butter. He turned mug in hand, steam curling upward like question marks. The city below stirred distant horns filtering through the sealed windows, a reminder of the world marching on. "About what, Langford? or how you're dismantling everything I've built." Sarah set her tea down, the ceramic thunk echoing softly. She crossed her arms, the wool of her sweater, soft but insufficient armor, against the confrontation brewing. The proposal's details flashed in her mind. The sabotage plan, its unsigned contract, a specter, promising ruin. She couldn't stay silent any longer. Integrity demanded action, even if it shattered her fragile independence. It's more than that. Michael's planning something big. A leak poaching the works. I saw the files. It's aimed straight at you. James's face paled the mug, trembling slightly before he set it down, liquid sloshing over the rim onto the counter. He leaned forward, palms flat on the granite veins, standing out like rivers on a map. "You knew and you didn't say anything until now." "I was caught in the middle," she admitted, her throat tight. "But I won't be part of it. Not anymore." The admission hung between them, heavy as the overcast sky outside. James paced to the living room, his bare feet padding on the hardwood, the floor cool and unyielding. Sarah followed the air, charged with betrayal's static, her pulse thundering in her ears. He stopped at the window, staring at the mist-shrouded skyline, where Caldwell Tech's logo once dominated billboards. Now a trace of a once-celebrated achievement, faded after recent stock dips, attributed to whispers of internal strife. "This is what happens when you play with fire," he said, voice rough. "Langford's always been a viper. And you walked right into his den." "Maybe, but you pushed me there," she countered, stepping closer. 3 years of being your silent partner, erased from your world. I needed this." He turned, eyes flashing with a mix of anger and something deeper, vulnerability raw and unexpected. The room felt smaller, the leather couch and coffee table obstacles in their emotional battlefield. "Erased, you think I wanted that? The board, the investors, they demand perfection. A stable image. I thought it protected us." Sarah shook her head, tears pricking her eyes, the salt sharp on her lashes. The confrontation escalated, words tumbling like rocks in an avalanche, unearthing resentments buried deep. "Protected you, you mean? Your empire. I'm just collateral." James's hands clenched at his sides, knuckles whitening. He moved to the study door, pausing with his hand on the knob, the brass cold under his palm. Inside his desk was cluttered with papers, a laptop screen saver, swirling abstract patterns in the dim light, filtering through half-drawn blinds. If this goes through, Caldwell's done. Years of work gone. The weight of it crushed him visibly, his posture crumbling like a sandcastle under waves. Sarah felt the shift, her anger softening into empathy, the dilemma resolving into clarity. She had to choose not between men, but between complicity and conscience. By midday at Caldwell Tech's headquarters, James sat in his corner office, the panoramic view of the Bellevue skyline mocking his turmoil. The space smelled of polished wood and fresh ink from printed memos stacked on his desk. He stared at the resignation letter he'd drafted on his computer, the cursor blinking accusingly at the end. Unsigned contract with his successor, a loyal VP lay beside it, terms outlining a seamless transition to avoid market panic. His name, once etched in the company's founding documents, would be struck from the official record as CEO, a quiet exit to preserve the empire he'd built from his garage startup days. Colleagues bustled outside the glass walls, unaware their voices muffled through the door. James picked up the phone, dialing the board chair, his voice steady despite the storm inside. "I'm stepping down effective immediately. Personal reasons. Recommend Ellis for interim." The call ended abruptly, the receiver heavy as he set it down. Relief washed over him, mingled with loss, the air conditioner's hum, the only sound in the sudden vacuum. He gathered his things, a photo of his parents from the desk, its frame dusty, A keycard to the executive suite, its magnetic strip worn. Walking out, he nodded to his assistant, her eyes widening in surprise. "Sir," she said, rising from her chair. "Take care, Ellen. It's been an honor." The elevator descended smoothly, the floors ticking by like seconds on a clock. Outside, the winter wind bit at his cheeks as he hailed a cab, the vehicle's interior, warm with the scent of vinyl and faint cigarette smoke. Directing the driver to the condo, James leaned back, watching the city blur past, bridges arching over water buildings piercing the clouds. Redemption flickered in his mind, a vulnerable path forward, stripped of titles and power. Sarah was home when he arrived, working from the dining table, her laptop open, amid scattered notes. She looked up as he entered, coat still on his expression, a mask cracking at the edges. "What happened?" she asked, standing her chair, scraping back. "I resigned. Caldwell's not mine anymore." The words landed like a thunderclap, Sarah's hand flying to her mouth, the room spinning slightly in the shock. He approached, not as the mogul, but as a man, unarmored, his eyes pleading. "I couldn't fight it. Not like this. Not without losing you." She searched his face, seeing the sacrifice. The empire forsaken for a chance at something real. The breaking point had arrived, betrayal confronted not with vengeance but surrender. Vulnerability hung in the air, tangible as the chill seeping through the door he'd left ajar. They sat then on the couch, knees touching the fabric worn from years of distant evenings. James spoke haltingly, his hands gesturing as if mapping a new terrain. "I built that company to prove something, to my family, to the world. But it cost me us. I see that now." Sarah listened, tears tracing silent paths down her cheeks, the salt lingering on her lips. The resignation was a seismic shift his pride yielded in a bid for redemption, forcing her to confront her own role in the fracture. "Why now?" she whispered. "Because you're worth more than any boardroom. I want to start over. With you." The moment stretched raw and exposed the condo's quiet, amplifying their breaths. Outside, snow began to fall, soft flakes, drifting past the window like unspoken promises. James's hand reached for hers, tentative, the skin warm despite the cold. Sarah didn't pull away the contact, a bridge over the chasm they'd widened. The breaking point wasn't destruction, but a pivot. Toward healing, perhaps, if vulnerability could mend what betrayal had torn. As evening deepened, the city lights piercing the snowfall, they talked into the night, voices low, the weight lifting incrementally with each confession. James's resignation echoed through her, a mirror to her own erasures, compelling her to consider forgiveness amid the ruins. The snow continued to fall outside the condo windows, blanketing the Seattle streets in a hush that mirrored the stunned quiet between Sarah and James. She stood frozen in the living room, her hands clasped tightly, knuckles paling as the reality of his words sank in like the cold seeping through the glass. The resignation letter, printed on crisp bond paper, lay on the coffee table where he'd tossed it, its edges curling slightly in the dry heat from the vents. James shrugged off his coat, letting it drape over the arm of the couch, the wool still dusted with melting flakes that dripped onto the rug, forming tiny dark spots like ink blots. His face, usually etched with the sharp lines of authority, now softened in the warm lamplight shadows, pooling under his eyes from exhaustion that went beyond a single day's turmoil. The air carried the faint scent of wet pavement from his shoes, mingling with the lingering aroma of her afternoon coffee grounds, scattered on the counter like forgotten confetti. Sarah moved first, her slippers whispering across the hardwood as she approached the table, picking up the letter. The words blurred slightly, effective immediately personal reasons. His signature bold at the bottom, a flourish she'd seen on countless documents, but never like this. It was a voluntary erasure his name struck from the official record of Caldwell Tech's leadership roster, a position he'd clawed to since graduating from Stanford building the company from a cramped apartment in the university district. She set it down gently, the paper rustling, and looked at him, her chest tight with a mix of disbelief and budding empathy. "Why give it all up?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper, the words catching in her throat. James sank onto the couch, the cushions sighing under his weight, and ran a hand through his hair, disheveling the usually impeccable strands. He stared at his hands, palms upturned, as if weighing invisible burdens, the faint calluses from weekend sailing trips, a remnant of the man beneath the suit. Because holding on to it meant losing you. The board, the deals, they're just noise. I built that company to escape my family's shadow, but it became one. I see now. I see how I made you disappear in it. His admission hung in the air, vulnerable and unadorned, stripping away the layers of pride that had armored him for years. Sarah sat beside him, the space between them, narrowing her knee, brushing his in a tentative contact that sent a warmth through the chill. The city outside blurred into a white haze, streetlights haloed in the snowfall, casting a soft glow through the room that made everything feel intimate, almost fragile. She thought of their wedding day, a subdued affair in a Portland chapel to satisfy his family's traditions, her own dreams tucked away like an unsigned contract, promises unfulfilled in the rush to stability. "What now?" she said, turning to face him fully, her hazel eyes searching his for deceit or regret. James met her gaze, his expression earnest, the blue of his irises deepened by the low light. He reached into his pocket, pulling out a small notebook, leather-bound edges worn from constant use, where he'd jotted ideas during commutes, now repurposed for this moment. Flipping it open, he showed her sketches, flowcharts for a new venture. Modest in scale, focused on ethical AI for non-profit circles, drawn around words like partnership and equality. "We start something together. Not my company, not yours, ours. Equal say, equal shares. No hierarchies, no shadows. I've got savings connections. But only if you want it. I'm asking Sarah. As me, not the CEO." The plea was humble, stripped of grandeur, his voice cracking slightly on the last words, a man unmoored from his throne. Sarah traced the notebook's pages with her finger, the ink smudged in places from hasty notes, feeling the texture of possibility. It was a fresh start he'd proposed, not a return to the old dynamics, but a reinvention where her intellect could shine alongside his unencumbered, bypassed erasures. The room's quiet amplified the tick of the wall clock, its hands moving inexorably forward, mirroring the shift in her mindset, from guarded resentment to cautious hope. "It's not that simple," she replied. Her tone measured the words weighted with years of quiet hurts. "Therapy first. We rebuild trust or this falls apart before it begins." James nodded, closing the notebook with a soft snap, his shoulders relaxing incrementally, as if her condition was a lifeline rather than a barrier. The snow outside thickened, muffling the distant hum of traffic, creating a cocoon where vulnerability could breathe. They talked then haltingly at first about logistics, the sale of assets, the non-disclosure agreements that would bind his exit. He described the board's stunned conference call, voices crackling over the line, the unmarked room in his mind where he'd made the decision alone, a mental space free of advisors and spreadsheets. As night deepened, they moved to the kitchen, hunger surfacing amid the emotional drain. Sarah heated soup from the fridge, the pot bubbling on the stove, steam rising in fragrant curls of tomato and basil. James sliced bread, the knife's rhythmic thud on the cutting board, a grounding sound, his movements deliberate, almost meditative. "I never told you about my first failure," he said, handing her a piece, the crust warm and crisp. Start-up in college. Crashed hard. Family wrote it off, but it taught me resilience. This is scarier. Starting over with you. Sarah dipped her bread into the soup, the flavors bursting on her tongue, a simple comfort in the complexity. His sharing felt like a bridge, each anecdote a plank laid across the divide. She reciprocated, speaking of her non-profit days, the unmarked room in the basement, where she'd crunched numbers late into nights, her contributions unmentioned in annual reports, overshadowed by directors' names. I felt invisible there too sometimes. But it built me. This new thing, it could be different. Their conversation flowed easier dialogue, weaving through the meal percentages, shifting as emotions ebbed from peak confrontation to reflective calm. James's plea had landed not as a command, but an invitation. His humility, a balm on old wounds. Sarah felt a stir of optimism, tentative, as the first green shoot in spring soil her mindset, pivoting toward partnership. By bedtime, the snow had eased, leaving a pristine layer on the balcony railing, visible through the glass doors. They prepared for sleep in companionable silence, the bathroom light spilling into the hallway, steam from the shower carrying the scent of soap. Under the covers, James turned to her, his hand finding hers in the dark, the touch light but intentional. "Thank you for listening," he murmured. "We'll see," she whispered back, squeezing gently. The night settled the condo's hum of appliances, a lullaby as Sarah lay awake, briefly pondering the proposal. It was a gamble, this fresh start, but in his vulnerability, she'd glimpsed the man she'd hoped to marry, not the tycoon, but the partner. The equal venture loomed as a canvas blank and inviting, where they could paint a future unmarred by past hierarchies. Dreams came fitfully, images of boardrooms transformed into collaborative spaces, her name etched alongside his, no longer struck from records, but celebrated in tandem. Morning brought clarity, the sun piercing the clouds to melt the snow into rivulets down the windows. Over coffee, James outlined next steps. Lawyers for the new LLC therapists, vetted from discreet recommendations. Sarah nodded, adding her input. The dialogue balanced a preview of the equality he promised. "Let's make it official," she said, pulling out her laptop, drafting a simple agreement on shared docs, unsigned contract for now, but a symbol of intent. He smiled, the first genuine one in weeks, lines crinkling around his eyes in the kitchen's morning light. The plea had evolved into planning humility, forging a path forward as they navigated the uncharted toward reconciliation. The morning after James's plea dawned with a rare Seattle sun, its rays slanting through the condo's blinds in golden stripes that warmed the hardwood floors and glinted off the kitchen appliances. Sarah stirred her coffee slowly, the spoon clinking against the mug's ceramic edge, creating ripples in the dark liquid that mirrored the uncertainty swirling in her mind. She had slept fitfully, dreams fragmented by images of boardrooms and blank canvases, her body tense even in repose. Now seated at the dining table, she watched James across from her, his face softened by the light stubble shadowing his jaw, in a way that made him look more approachable, less the untouchable executive. The notebook from last night lay between them, its pages open to the sketches of their potential venture lines, and arrows faded slightly from the pressure of his pen. The air smelled of brewed beans and the faint citrus of his shampoo from the shower, a domestic normalcy that felt both comforting and surreal after the emotional upheaval. Sarah set the spoon down, the metal cool against her fingers, and met his gaze. Hope flickered in his eyes, tentative, as the sunlight piercing the clouds outside, where pigeons cooed on the balcony, railing their feathers ruffled by a gentle breeze. She felt the pull toward reconciliation, a quiet yearning for the partnership he'd described, but scars from years of neglect ran deep, like grooves worn into the table's wood from countless meals eaten in silence. Trust wasn't a switch to flip. It required deliberate mending, layer by layer. "I want to try," she said, her voice steady but soft, the words tasting like a cautious step forward. "But on one condition: therapy. Couples sessions starting now. We dig into everything. The arrangement, the silences, all of it. No shortcuts." James nodded without hesitation, his hands folding around his own mug, the steam rising in lazy tendrils that obscured his expression momentarily. He leaned back in the chair, the wood creaking faintly, and exhaled the breath carrying the weight of concession. "Agreed, whatever it takes. I've already looked up a few places. Discreet, experienced with high-profile clients. We can book today." The swift acceptance surprised her, a shift from the man who'd once dismissed emotional discussions as inefficiencies. Sarah reached for her phone on the table, its screen smudged from yesterday's frantic typing, and pulled up a calendar app, the digital grid, stark against the morning's warmth. They scheduled the first session for that afternoon, a neutral office in Queen Anne, its address typed in with efficient taps. The act felt binding, an unsigned contract of intent, committing them to vulnerability in a space designed for unraveling knots rather than tying deals. As the day unfolded, Sarah worked from home, her laptop perched on the couch, the cushions still indented from their late-night talk. Emails from Langford pinged in queries about ongoing projects, but she replied curtly, her focus fractured. Michael's sabotage plan loomed in her thoughts, a shadow she hadn't fully addressed amid the personal storm. She drafted a resignation email to him, fingers hovering over the send button, the cursor blinking like a heartbeat. Quitting felt like closing a chapter, but necessary for this new one. Independence reclaimed not through rivalry, but mutual growth. James spent the morning on calls, his voice, muffled from the study, arranging the finer points of his exit from Caldwell Tech. She overheard snippets through the door, the thud of his pacing feet on the carpet, the polite finality in his tone as he transferred responsibilities. By noon he emerged, jacket slung over his arm, the fabric wrinkled from being balled up, overnight. "Ready?" he asked, keys jingling in his hand, the metal catching the light. Sarah stood smoothing her sweater, its knit soft under her palms, and nodded. The drive to the therapist's office wound through hilly streets lined with craftsman homes, their porches adorned with hanging ferns that swayed in the wind. Traffic hummed around them, cars splashing through residual puddles from last night's snowmelt, the wipers occasionally flicking away stray droplets. Inside the SUV, silence reigned, at first broken by James's hand, reaching for the radio, tuning to a soft jazz station, saxophones weaving melodies that eased the tension. "Nervous," she ventured, glancing at his profile, the jawline she'd once traced in quieter times. Terrified, he admitted, a half smile, tugging his lips. "But it's overdue." The office was in a converted Victorian house, its exterior painted sage green steps leading to a door with a brass knocker shaped like a lion's head. Inside, the waiting room smelled of lavender diffuser and old books, walls lined with abstract art in muted blues that evoked calm seas. They sat on a plush sofa knees, not touching, flipping through magazines whose pages whispered under their fingers, articles on mindfulness and relationships, words blurring as anxiety built. The therapist, Dr. Elena Vargas, greeted them with a warm handshake, her grip firm and reassuring, leading them to a sunlit room at the back. It was unmarked on the hallway directory, a private space for sensitive sessions, its door blending with paneled walls, where faint outlines lingered from removed plaques of previous occupants. Couches faced each other, upholstered in neutral grey, a box of tissues on the side table like a silent sentinel. Dr. Vargas, mid-50s, with silver-streaked hair, pinned neatly settled into an armchair notepad in lap, her pen poised. "Let's start with why you're here," she said, voice even, eyes shifting between them. James spoke first, recounting the marriage's origins. The arranged union to satisfy board expectations, his absorption in work that left Sarah adrift. His words flowed haltingly, hands gesturing as if shaping the air, the sunlight filtering through sheer curtains, casting elongated shadows that danced on the rug's intricate patterns. I thought success would fix everything he said. But it isolated us. Sarah listened, her legs crossed, foot tapping subtly against the floor, the carpet muffling the sound. When her turn came, emotions surged, voice thickening as she described the erasures. The way her ambitions were sidelined, her name struck from social invitations as merely Mrs. Caldwell, her intellect confined to shadows. I felt like a prop. She confessed, tears welling the tissue pulled from the box, crinkling in her hand. Therapy has to change that. Build us from zero. Dr. Vargas nodded, jotting notes, the pen's scratch, a rhythmic underscore. She guided them through exercises, mirroring statements, active listening, the room filling with echoed phrases, vulnerabilities laid bare like peeled fruit. James admitted his fears of inadequacy, rooted in a family legacy of high achievers, his voice cracking on memories of his father's stern approvals. Sarah shared her own insecurities, the non-profit accolades unmentioned after marriage, a trace of a once-celebrated achievement in community awards, now gathering dust in a drawer. "This is groundwork," Dr. Vargas said at session's end, standing to see them out. "Weekly commitments, homework, daily check-ins, no judgments." Outside, the sun had dipped lower, casting long shadows across the lawn as they walked to the car arms, brushing accidentally a spark of connection. In the vehicle, James started the engine, the hum vibrating through the seats. "That was intense," he said, pulling onto the street. "But necessary," she replied, a small smile, forming the first unguarded one in months. Back home, they unpacked the session over tea, the kettle whistling shrilly, before settling into pores of steaming chamomile. Dialogue flowed more freely, percentages tilting toward reflection, the conditional reunion solidifying with each shared insight. Sarah felt trust budding, fragile but real, her insistence on therapy, a foundation for rebuilding. Evenings that followed blended into routines. Dinners cooked together, the sizzle of onions in the pan, a backdrop to conversations that delved deeper. Laughter, occasionally punctuating the seriousness. Weeks passed in this rhythm sessions, unveiling layers the therapist's room, a sanctuary where walls absorbed confessions without echo. James embraced the process, his humility growing while Sarah reclaimed her voice, the partnership proposal evolving from sketch to plan. They filed preliminary papers for the new LLC, an unsigned contract, awaiting final tweaks, symbolizing their joint future. One evening, as rain pattered against the windows again, Sarah leaned against James on the couch, his arm around her shoulders, the contact warm and steady. "We're getting there," she murmured. "Yeah," he agreed, kissing her temple lightly. The reunion, conditional yet committed, wove them closer therapy, the thread mending what time had frayed. The rhythm of therapy sessions had become a steady anchor in Sarah and James's lives, much like the predictable drizzle that blanketed Seattle in early spring, turning the streets into glistening ribbons under overcast skies. Weeks blurred into a pattern, mornings spent sketching business plans for their new venture at the dining table, the wood surface cluttered with notepads and laptops, their screens reflecting the soft glow of overhead lights. Afternoons brought the drive to Dr. Vargas's office, the car's tires humming over rain-slicked roads, lined with budding cherry blossoms, petals occasionally fluttering onto the windshield like confetti from a distant celebration. Evenings were for reflection, the condo filled with the sizzle of homemade meals, pasta boiling in a pot sauce simmering with garlic and herbs. As they unpacked the day's insights, voices low, and measured the air thick with the scent of progress. One such afternoon, as they settled into the familiar couches in Dr. Vargas's unmarked room, the space felt charged with an undercurrent Sarah couldn't quite place. The therapist's notepad lay open on her lap, pages filled with neat script from prior sessions, while a potted fern in the corner drooped slightly, its leaves brushing the windowsill, where sunlight filtered through half-drawn blinds, casting striped patterns on the faded oriental rug. Sarah shifted in her seat, the upholstery creaking softly, her hands resting on her abdomen absent-mindedly, a gesture she'd noticed more frequently, though she attributed it to nerves. James sat beside her, his knee no longer bouncing with impatience, a sign of the trust they'd been rebuilding brick by emotional brick. Dr. Vargas leaned forward, her silver earrings catching the light as she adjusted her glasses, the frames thin and wire-rimmed. Today let's explore expectations for the future. With the new company launching soon, how do you envision supporting each other? James spoke first, his tone, thoughtful fingers interlaced in his lap, the skin still smooth from years behind a desk rather than manual labor. I see us as equals, truly. No more one person in the spotlight. We've drafted the incorporation papers, equal shares, joint decisions. It's a clean slate. Sarah nodded, but a wave of nausea rolled through her, subtle at first, like the distant rumble of thunder over the sound. She'd felt off for days, fatigue weighing her limbs, a metallic taste lingering on her tongue, despite brushing her teeth twice that morning. She attributed it to stress, the therapy, dredging up old pains like silt from a riverbed. But as the session progressed, Dr. Vargas guiding them through role-playing exercises, mirroring each other's concerns, the words echoing in the quiet room. Sarah's discomfort sharpened. She excused herself midway, hurrying to the bathroom down the hall, its door unmarked, save for a small brass plate, the tile floor cool under her flats, as she leaned over the sink, splashing water on her face, droplets clinging to her lashes. Back in the room, James watched her return concern, etching his brow, the lines deeper in the afternoon, light slanting through the window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. "You okay?" he asked, voice low, as Dr. Vargas paused. "Just a bug, maybe," she replied, forcing a smile, the tissue from the side table twisted in her hand. The session wrapped with homework, journaling shared dreams for the venture entries to be read aloud next time. Driving home, the radio played softly a folk tune, strumming guitar strings that vibrated through the speakers, but Sarah's mind wandered. Stops at a pharmacy on the way, the fluorescent lights harsh overhead aisles, stocked with vitamins and over-the-counter remedies. She picked up a pregnancy test on impulse, the box small and unassuming in her basket, its plastic crinkling as she paid at the self-checkout, the cashier's scanner beeping indifferently. That evening, alone in the bathroom while James prepared dinner, the chop of vegetables rhythmic from the kitchen, Sarah unwrapped the test, the instructions fluttering to the counter like fallen leaves. The wait felt eternal, the digital window on the stick staring back blankly at first, then resolving into two pink lines, stark against the white background. Her breath caught the mirror, reflecting her widened eyes, chestnut hair, tousled from the day's wind, the silver pendant at her throat rising with each rapid inhale. Pregnant. The word echoed in her mind, a revelation that reshaped everything like a key, turning in a rusted lock. She emerged, test in hand, the condo's open layout leading her straight to the kitchen, where James stood at the stove, stirring a pot of risotto steam, rising in aromatic clouds of arborio, rice, and parmesan. The city lights twinkled beyond the windows, a backdrop of twinkling stars against the darkening sky. "James," she said, voice trembling slightly, holding out the stick. He turned, wiping his hands on a dish towel, its fabric patterned with faded stripes, and took it, squinting at the display. Recognition dawned slowly, his face shifting from confusion to astonishment, eyes widening as he set the towel down the counter's edge, pressing into his palm. Are we? "Yes, I'm pregnant." The words hung in the air, heavy with implication, the risotto bubbling forgotten on the burner, its scent now overpowering in the charged silence. James pulled her into an embrace, his arms enveloping her, the wool of his sweater soft against her cheek, his heartbeat thudding steadily through the fabric. But beneath the joy, an undercurrent of apprehension stirred, the pregnancy not a fairy tale fix, but a catalyst forcing them to confront the fractures still healing. "This changes things," he murmured into her hair, pulling back to meet her gaze, his hands on her shoulders, warm and grounding. "It does. We can't pretend everything's perfect now. Therapy has to go deeper. We have to face the trust issues, the resentments before bringing a child into this." James nodded, his expression solemn, the kitchen's pendant lights casting a halo around him, highlighting the grey flecks in his hair that had appeared in recent months. They sat at the table dinner, cooling on plates, and talked. Really talked, the dialogue flowing with a new urgency. He admitted fears of repeating his parents' distant dynamic voices from childhood echoing in his mind, while Sarah voiced anxieties about balancing motherhood with the startup, her independence hard-won and now complicated. "I don't want our child to grow up in shadows like I did," she said, tracing the grain of the wood table, fingers following the whirls like paths untaken. "Neither do I. We'll make it work. Therapy, the business, all of it. Together." The revelation compelled action. The next therapy session they shared the news first. Dr. Vargas's eyes, lighting with a professional warmth, her pen pausing on the notepad as she adjusted her approach, incorporating parenting dynamics into exercises. The unmarked room became a crucible for deeper confrontations, role plays of late-night feedings amid business calls, discussions of vulnerabilities exposed by impending parenthood. Sarah felt the pregnancy as a physical reminder. Morning sickness in the office bathroom, her hand on the cool porcelain sink, but also an emotional spur, pushing them to address lingering doubts. Amid this, the new company took shape, a modest office leased in Fremont, its walls bare, save for faint outlines of removed logos from prior tenants, a trace of a once-celebrated achievement in the neighborhood's tech history, now unmentioned. They hired a small team, interviews conducted over coffee in a nearby cafe, the aroma of espresso grounding the excitement. Sarah's belly began to show subtly, her dresses looser, the fabric flowing over the gentle curve, a visual symbol of their evolving life. Nights brought intimacy reborn. James's hand on her stomach, feeling the first flutters the condo's quiet, amplified by rain tapping the windows like Morse code. Yet confrontations arose, arguments over work divisions, therapy, homework, revealing buried grudges, voices rising in the living room, the couch cushions compressing under their weight as they hashed it out. "You're still controlling, sometimes," she accused one evening, gesturing to the business plan spread on the floor, papers rustling. "And you're holding back, afraid to commit." "Fully," he countered, but then softened, therapy tools kicking in. "I feel." Statements diffusing the heat. The pregnancy compelled resolution, each session peeling layers, the revelation, a force multiplier for healing. By month's end, trust solidified the child, a beacon, guiding them through storms head-on and unyielding. Spring gave way to the mild haze of a Seattle summer, where the sun lingered longer over the Puget Sound, casting shimmering reflections on the water, that Sarah watched from the window of their new office in Fremont. The space was modest, a converted warehouse with exposed brick walls and high ceilings crossed by industrial beams, the air carrying the faint tang of fresh paint and sawdust from recent renovations. Desks clustered in an open layout, cables snaking across the concrete floor like veins powering laptops and monitors that hummed with the quiet energy of a startup in its infancy. Sarah and James had named the firm Equinox AI, a nod to balance and renewal. Its logo, a simple equilateral triangle, etched on a glass door that swung open to admit their small team of 5 developers, a marketer, an admin, and a part-time accountant. The pregnancy had progressed to her second trimester, her belly a gentle swell under loose blouses, the fabric soft and breathable against her skin as she moved between meetings. Her steps measured to accommodate the subtle shift in her balance. They'd launched quietly, no fanfare or press releases, just a website going live one overcast morning, its pages loading with clean code. Sarah had vetted herself. The focus was on ethical AI tools for small non-profits, algorithms that optimized donor outreach without invasive tracking dashboards that highlighted biases in datasets. James handled operations, his sleeves rolled up as he configured servers in a back room, the fans whirring like distant bees, while Sarah led product development, her whiteboard sketches evolving into prototypes amid the clatter of keyboards. Challenges arose: early funding dips from cautious investors, wary of James's abrupt exit from Caldwell, technical glitches that kept them up late, screens glowing in the dim office as coffee cups accumulated like trophies of endurance. One afternoon, amid the hum of printers spitting out reports, Sarah sat in a conference area, partitioned by frosted glass panels, reviewing a beta test with the team. The room was unmarked, a flexible space, without a door plaque, its walls still bearing faint adhesive marks from the previous tenant's posters, remnants of a failed graphic design firm whose name had been struck from the building's directory after bankruptcy, erased, as if they'd never occupied the creative hub. Raj, rehired from Langford after Sarah's quiet recommendation, leaned over her shoulder, pointing at the screen with a stylus, its tip clicking softly. "See here, the model's overfitting on edge cases. We need to prune the dataset." Sarah nodded, adjusting parameters with quick keystrokes, the cursor blinking rhythmically. Her free hand rested on her bump, feeling a faint kick, a reminder of the life intertwining with their professional rebirth. James entered, then carrying a stack of contracts from the printer, the papers warm and slightly curled at the edges. "First client agreement," he announced, sliding it across the table. "Unsigned for now, waiting on their legal review. But it's a non-profit in Tacoma, perfect fit for our mission." The team murmured approvals. The marketer, a young woman named Lila with vibrant tattoos peeking from her sleeves, jotting notes on her tablet, the screen reflecting her enthusiastic grin. Sarah scanned the document, its clauses straightforward, emphasizing transparency and equity, principles they'd woven into every aspect of Equinox. Honesty had become their cornerstone, forged in therapy sessions, where Dr. Vargas probed deeper into parental roles, the revelations compelling them to model vulnerability for their child. Evenings at home blended work and preparation, the condo transformed with a nursery corner, emerging in the spare room. Crib assembled amid scattered tools, its wood smooth under James's hands. As he tightened screws, the metallic scent mingling with fresh linens. They navigated challenges with mutual respect, therapy homework, ensuring conflicts didn't fester. One night, as they painted the nursery walls, a soft sage green, rollers gliding with wet slaps, paint flecks dotting their old clothes, a disagreement surfaced over scaling the business. "We can't rush growth," Sarah said, stepping back to assess the even coat brush in hand, dripping slightly onto the drop cloth. "Remember what happened at Caldwell. Expansion blinded you to the cracks. James paused, roller poised, mid-stroke paint glistening on the fibers. He set it down in the tray, the plastic crinkling, and wiped his forehead with the back of his arm, leaving a green streak like war paint. You're right. But investors are knocking. We need capital for the baby's future, too. She met his eyes, the room's single bulb, casting elongated shadows that danced with their movements, the air thick with turpentine and unspoken fears. Not at the cost of us. Let's table it for therapy tomorrow. No decisions without consensus. He nodded respect, evident in the way he resumed painting strokes, deliberate and unhurried. The modesty of their firm allowed such pauses, no board breathing down their necks, just the two of them steering equal votes on every pivot. Success came in small victories. The first tool deployment feedback emails praising its user-friendliness, the team's morale, boosted by Friday lunches at a nearby food truck tacos, wrapped in foil, steaming in the summer air. As her due date approached, physical challenges mounted. Backaches during long coding sessions, feet swelling in the office's ergonomic chairs that creaked under shifting weight. James adapted, bringing her herbal tea in a thermos, its lid clicking open to release chamomile steam, or taking over demos, his voice, confident yet inclusive, crediting her innovations without fanfare. Mutual respect shone in these acts, a far cry from their old dynamic therapy, reinforcing communication like rebar in concrete. One pivotal challenge hit midsummer, a bug in their flagship algorithm discovered during a client trial, data outputs skewed by an overlooked variable. The office buzzed with urgency. Developers huddled around a central monitor code, scrolling in green text on black backgrounds, fingers flying over keyboards in a symphony of clicks. Sarah, from her desk, coordinated remotely via video call her home setup, framed by nursery decor in progress. Isolate the module, she directed. Voice calm through the speakers. Run diagnostics on the training set. James, in the thick of it, relayed updates, his shirt, untucked hair, disheveled from raking fingers through it. Got it. Fix incoming. Your catch saved us. The resolution came after hours, the team cheering faintly over the line, high fives audible in slaps. Back home, James recounted the details over dinner. Grilled salmon flaking on plates, asparagus spears charred just right. Their conversation laced with gratitude. We make a good team, he said, reaching across the table, his hand covering hers, skin warm from the day's exertions. We do, she agreed, squeezing back the baby's kick, syncing with the moment a triad in harmony. The firm grew steadily, not explosively, revenues covering costs with a modest surplus funneled into reserves. They celebrated milestones quietly, a team outing to Gasworks Park, kites soaring against the blue sky, laughter echoing over the grass as they picnicked on blankets dotted with crumbs. Sarah felt fulfillment in the balance, motherhood looming as an enhancement, not a detour, the pregnancy compelling them to prioritize well-being over ambition. Therapy continued sessions, now incorporating prenatal topics. Dr. Vargas's room, a constant amid change, its fern revived with watering leaves perking in the sunlight. They confronted final hurdles, James's lingering regrets over Caldwell, voiced in halting admissions, the air heavy with his sighs. I miss the scale sometimes, he confessed, notepad in lap crinkling. But not the isolation. Sarah added her input, a bridge to acceptance. The modest firm became their testament to resilience challenges met with honesty that fortified their bond. As autumn hints appeared, leaves edging gold on trees lining the streets, Sarah reflected on the journey, her hand on her belly, feeling the life that had spurred their transformation. Equinox wasn't just a business, it was a legacy rebuilt brick by honest brick respect, the mortar holding it firm. A year had passed since the birth of their daughter Lily, whose arrival in the crisp air of a Seattle autumn had marked the true beginning of their rebuilt life. The Equinox AI office in Fremont buzzed with a steady rhythm, now no longer the frantic scramble of early days, but a harmonious flow, like the steady drip of coffee from the machine in the break area, its aroma weaving through the open space amid the soft clicks of keyboards and murmured collaborations. The team had grown to 8 desks, arranged in pods under string lights that dangled from the beams, casting warm pools on the concrete floor, polished to a subtle sheen. Sarah moved through it all with purpose, her figure returned to its familiar lines. But softened by motherhood, a baby monitor clipped to her belt, emitting occasional coos that blended with the office hum. Lily napped in a portable crib in the corner office. They shared its walls adorned with family photos, candid shots from therapy retreats and park outings, rather than corporate accolades. Therapy had culminated not in a grand finale, but a quiet graduation. Dr. Vargas's unmarked room, witnessing their final session, where confessions gave way to affirmations, the air light with closure. They'd sat on those grey couches one last time. Hands intertwined the fern in the corner, thriving now, its leaves a vibrant green against the window's view of blooming dogwoods. James had spoken of his growth voice, steady, acknowledging the ego he'd shed like an outgrown skin. I learned to listen truly. Not just here. Sarah had nodded her eyes, meeting his with the depth of shared trials, the tissue box untouched for months. And I learned to trust again. We both did. Dr. Vargas had smiled, closing her notepad with a soft snap, the pen tucked behind her ear. You've built something solid. Keep nurturing it. Back at the office, success manifested in metrics they cherished, non-profits, empowered by their tools, feedback emails praising accessibility revenues, stable enough for modest expansions. A new server rack humming in the back, its lights blinking like watchful eyes. Challenges persisted, of course. Late-night bug fixes with Lily fussing in the background, investor pitches balanced against pediatrician visits. But they faced them with the tools therapy had honed, open dialogue pauses for empathy. One evening, as twilight painted the sound in purples and golds visible from their window, a client call rapped successfully, the phone's beep echoing in the quieting space. That was seamless, James said, leaning back in his chair, the leather creaking. Because we prepped together, Sarah replied, shutting her laptop, the screen's glow fading. Their love wasn't the stuff of romances, no lavish gestures or dramatic reunions, but a durable weave of respect and effort, evident in small acts, James brewing her tea during brainstorming, Sarah covering his meetings for daddy-daughter time. The firm thrived on this foundation, a beacon for the team who witnessed their equity in action. Decisions voted on in circle meetings, voices equal regardless of title. Home life mirrored this, the condo, alive with Lily's toddles across the rug, her laughter a counterpoint to the rain's patter on the balcony doors. Evenings brought family dinners, plates clinking, as they recounted days therapy's legacy in their check-ins. How did that feel, James might ask after a tough negotiation. Supported, she'd answer, meaning it. The year had forged them anew past wounds, hallowed into strengths, their story a quiet testament to redemption through persistence. In the quiet expanse of a Seattle evening, where the city's lights flickered like distant memories across the water, Sarah and James stood on their balcony. Lily asleep inside her soft breaths, monitored through the open door. The air carried the salt of the sound, mingled with the earth's damp renewal, after a light rain, puddles reflecting the moon's sliver overhead. They leaned on the railing shoulders, touching in comfortable silence, the weight of the past year, settling like sediment in a calmed stream. Equinox AI hummed below in their minds, a modest empire not of conquest, but collaboration, where erasures of old had given way to inscriptions of mutual worth. Therapy's echoes lingered not as mandates, but instincts, guiding words unspoken, yet felt in every glance. James turned to her, his hand finding hers, fingers interlacing with a familiarity born of hard-won intimacy. No words needed. The touch spoke of honor, restored conflicts resolved not in victory, but understanding. Yet ambiguity whispered in the wind. Would challenges return, testing their fragile peace? Regret, perhaps for time lost, but it fueled their resolve, a quiet fire against the night's chill. Sarah squeezed back her eyes on the horizon, where ferries cut slow paths, lights trailing like forgotten dreams. In this moment, completeness reigned, but life's uncertainties loomed a gentle reminder that endurance was their true legacy. Perhaps it's just waiting for a name to be called. What feelings or thoughts does this story evoke for you? Share in the comments below. We'd love to hear your reflections on overlooked heroes and second chances. Where are you listening to this story from? Like, share and subscribe to Fanciko Stories to follow future stories.